Certainly there's a reason for every crime to take place, but it wasn't obvious from looking at this scene because both of these victims would be considered extremely low risk.
2 people are found dead in their home in Tallahassee, Florida.
All of us found great significance that the 2 victims were killed in different ways.
Is it a murder-suicide, a burglary gone wrong, or was someone out to get them?
So we had to consider what would be a reason for these 2 individuals to die in this home on that particular night.
Tallahassee, Florida. In a quiet middle-class neighborhood on Mary's Drive, a man notices something strange in his neighbor's backyard. A body lying motionless in the grass, completely naked. Paramedics rush to the scene, but they are too late. The man lying in the yard is already dead. But who is he, and how did he die? The police are called, and Sergeant Karen Brown of the Tallahassee Police Department arrives on the scene.
When we first got here, we assumed that it may be something like a heart attack or something of that sort. He was lying on his stomach, didn't have any clothes on. There was a little bit of blood on him. And at that point, we began thinking that something else may be wrong.
Karen Brown heads to the front of the house to see if anyone might be inside.
Officers came around to the front and looked through this door. It was a glass-type door. And were able to see a white female lying on the floor there, and we had to make forced entry through this door. When I saw her, she was covered in blood. She had numerous stab wounds about her chest. She had defense wounds on her arm. It was very violent.
2 dead bodies, one obviously murdered, but the second, cause of death, unknown.
The death in the backyard didn't make sense to the death inside the house. We were wondering if it was murder-suicide. Could it have been that? Or was it someone had killed both of them and fled?
Sergeant Brown is assigned to work the case along with lead investigator Cecil Toll, and they start with the victims. The male is identified as Richard Booth, a Vietnam vet and the father of 2.
Dick Booth was a registered nurse that worked at Tallahassee Memorial Hospital. He was classified as a traveling nurse.
The female victim is 54-year-old Anna Parker, a mother of 3 who worked the night shift at the post office. Parker and Booth had been in an up-and-down relationship for years, and when Anna Parker's son, Navy recruiter Ray Parker, gets the news that his mother has been murdered, he thinks he knows who could have done it.
I was absolutely 100% sure she had been killed by Dick Booth. I would have bet my paycheck on it. Maybe she took my advice and kicked him to the curb and told him to go away. Or, I don't know, maybe he tried to, was gonna kill himself and decided to take her with him.
But everyone's initial theories are proved wrong when Richard Booth's autopsy results come back. The cause of death, strangulation asphyxia, meaning Booth had been murdered as well. With murder-suicide crossed off the list, investigators now need to take another approach.
I first heard about this homicide investigation on the morning news. This case was local to me, and the victim's home was practically in the shadow of the headquarters building for my police agency. Most people would assume that an older, well-established residential neighborhood would be a very safe place to live, and it was very much a surprise when this couple was murdered in this home. They led a very low-key lifestyle. They weren't involved in drugs. This wasn't a home that enjoyed great wealth. There didn't seem to be any reason for this attack.
Hinman might not know what the reason was for the attack, but she can quickly determine what the reason wasn't.
In looking at the crime scene photos, we noticed that Anna Parker's purse was over her shoulder and her keys were in proximity to her body. So nothing was taken from the scene. So it's not a robbery, it's not a sexual assault. It's not really clear what happened.
But if it wasn't a robbery or a sexual assault, what was it? And why had it happened?
We sat down as a group and explored all the possible motives for this particular type of crime. And at the end of the day, we all felt sure that the person who went there to this house on that night knew the victims and targeted them.
But who would want this couple dead? Coming up next on Body of Evidence, Special Agent Hinman heads to Tallahassee to meet with investigators and search for answers. A couple is found dead in their home in Tallahassee, Florida. But the crime scene is baffling. 2 victims, 2 different causes of death, and no apparent motive.
Certainly there's a reason for every crime to take place, but it wasn't obvious from looking at this scene because both of these victims would be considered extremely low risk. So the group had to consider what would be a reason for these 2 individuals to die in this home on that particular night.
Hinman arrives at the Tallahassee Police Department to discuss the case with investigators Toll and Brown. The first thing she does is look through the crime scene photos, one by one.
I see there's a piece of jewelry outside of the front door here. Is this where you think the first attack occurred?
Yeah, what we think probably is that she was coming outside and probably going to work because she had her purse with her and had a bag of like Diet Cokes.
Were any of the other rooms disturbed in the house?
The only room that we could discover that was ransacked or went through was the master bedroom, where the drawers were pulled out and the clothing dropped on the floor and then placed on the bed in a neat order. But the other rooms there was nothing disturbed in the other rooms.
The fact that nothing else was disturbed in any of the other rooms is significant to Hinman.
The dumping of the clothing on the bed and on the floor from the drawers almost looks like an inexperienced burglar or perhaps maybe a youthful offender, because if this individual was very experienced as a burglar, he could go in and take items from the drawers without dumping everything out onto the floor and onto the bed and making this big mess. So it almost looks like possibly someone with a lack of experience or perhaps youthful.
Hinman's profile begins to emerge. She believes they are most likely dealing with a killer who knew the victims, and that he was probably young. And a suspect soon emerges that fits Hinman's profile to a T. Richard Booth's very own son, Rick Booth Jr.
First off, when we went to do the death notification, he didn't seem emotional, upset, to indicate anything that he was like surprised. He really didn't ask a whole lot of questions. Also, later that day, they had a big party at his house, which would be one of the last things you would think a son would do after he had been told that his father had died.